I'm going to go over some components of what make a good contact or to start out a sales approach. What are the keys behind that? What are the motivations behind what you're supposed to say? And if you understand the motivations behind it, then what you're saying becomes a lot more sincere and you're going to be very successful. First of all, I want to talk about the two keys. They're called key benefits and key concerns. These two things, if you can understand key benefits and key concerns, you're going to get a long way with a customer. If you come into the door or do a door approach or any kind of sales approach at all, whether door to door or business to business or whatever it is, and your only concerns are finding what would cause a person to buy your product and what would keep them from buying or what would keep them from getting it, what would cause them to get it. Basically, everyone in the world is motivated by two things. Fear of loss and desire for gain. Your job as a salesman is to understand what's going to keep a person from buying your product, what is going to cause them to get it, and understand their motivations in life. When I say fear of loss and desire for gain, a way to understand that is if you can imagine your customer is here. This right here is going to represent fear. This right here is going to represent their desire for gain, what they want to get out of this transaction. If you are trying to tell a person how much they're going to gain by using your product and all they're staring at is the fear, they will not make a buying decision because all they see is fear of loss. Your job is to remove this or increase this so that they can see it at least. So either increase the desire for gain or decrease the fear of loss. And with that said, you first need to understand what they are fearing, what is going to keep them from getting it. And you also need to understand what would cause them to get it. So what kind of gain or desire for gain is going to cause a person to make a buying decision. With that said, the reason we tell you this is because if you go to a door and the only thing that you're concerned about is what is going to cause this person to buy, what is going to keep them from buying, and you're only worried about those two things, you will come up with a door approach that will work for you. And the reason it'll work is because if you walk away from every door, just forget, I want to make sales. Forget that. Just focus on the principle of I'm going to go around this neighborhood for today and find out if two things at every single door. And if you can sincerely find out what would keep them from buying your product and what would cause them to buy your product, those two things, sales will happen automatically. So with that said, understanding this really kind of guides your motivations for what you say, and you understand why you're saying things that you're saying because it's going to bring you to the understanding of that. So with that said, when it comes to contacting, there's a rule called ABC. Always be contacting everywhere, every place. For example, if I'm fueling up a car, if I'm out to lunch or something like that, I want to make sure that I have my binder with me all the time, that I have a contract available. So that, like, if I'm fueling a car and the guy's next to me fueling up his car, I can say, hey, have you ever thought about getting a dish, or do you want to get a satellite dish? That's basically my contact when I'm out in public. And the thing that's nice about that is that when you go to the door, a lot of times people feel like maybe you're being intrusive. You're coming on their turf. If you're talking to someone in public places, they don't have the walls that are up when a door-to-door salesman comes to them. So always be contacting means everywhere, every place, all the time. Remember that with this principle, during the summer sales program, there are only 3 things that get you paid. And that's it. If you get really good at these 3 things, you're going to make a lot of money. The worst of the 3 is placing a flyer. It can be effective, but it's not going to make you a ton of money. But it gets you paid. You also want to get referrals. But the main thing that you want to be doing is always talking to somebody new. Always finding out if someone is interested in getting a satellite dish. Always be contacting, doing these 3 things all of the time. Also, you want to make sure that the person that you're speaking to is a decision maker. If you're contacting people that aren't decision makers, you won't make any money. And so also make sure that when you're contacting, for example, if you go to a door and a child comes to the door, you want to quickly ask them, are your parents home? And if they say no, that they're not, then you want to say, okay, great. Have you ever heard them talking about getting a satellite dish before? It's not very often, but you'll be surprised because sometimes they say, yeah, I have heard my parents talking about getting a satellite dish. If that's the case, then you just want to move quickly into, well, great, here, let me get your phone number and what are their names, and then hand them a flyer, tell them I'll be calling later and call them back. You'll make a lot of those sales. If a child in the home has heard their parents, they've heard the decision makers talking about getting a satellite dish, then you're halfway there. You can make a sell with that. If they say no, not really, you want to place a flyer and quickly move on, because you want the flyer has to be in the hands of the decision maker, or you have to be talking to a decision maker. If you're talking to anyone other than a decision maker, you are not making money. Okay, as far as your approach goes, first of all, when you come to a door, you want to make sure that you have good posture, that you bring some sort of energy with you to the door. You also want to have with you the binder ready to use. In other words, with a sales binder, you have a contract. Underneath of the contract, you like to have maybe a piece of paper that you can get a names list for the referrals that we talked about. And then you want to have the laminate on top of the contract. Basically, the reason for that is when a person is ready to make a buying decision, you want to be able to just seamlessly move into the close without it being a big deal. So if they're interested, just move this to the back of the binder and start filling out the contract. You don't want to have to fumble opening the binder, finding the contract, and so forth. Also on the back of the binder here, I've got the channels so that when they want to know what we have to offer as far as channels, that's there. So when you come to the door, again, I like to bring some sort of energy with me, which means that I'm smiling when I come to the door. In addition, I walk briskly because it seems to bring motivation, or momentum, I should say. And when you come to the door, make sure that like with the posture, the way that works is I like to turn a little bit to the side, depending on where the door knob is. So if the doorknob's on this side of the door, then I'm going to turn so I'm facing the person when they come to the door, or vice versa. In addition, I've got my binder. I always put that to the side just like it's a workbench table, something that looks a little bit more professional. When I knock on the door, they come to the door, and that's when I begin the actual approach. Remember that you got to have good posture. I like to imagine that there's a string on my head kind of pulling my head up to keep my posture good. And like I said before, make sure that you're smiling and have, you're bringing some sort of energy to the door. That person's excitement and energy level will never get as high as yours. And so if you come to the door down, they're going to be down. If you come to the door up, they're going to be up. But it can never, their excitement level for the product will never outdo yours. Also, when you're selling, a lot of times when you go door to door, you've got a lot of time in between doors. What you do with that time is extremely important for the energy and the momentum and the motivation that you have when you come to the door. I like to make sure that I am constantly giving myself basically positive talk. This is going to sound a little bit funny, but I actually talk to myself in between doors. And if you were to follow me around in some neighborhood, you'd probably think I'd be a little bit weird. But what I like to say is, I like myself, I'm a great salesman, constantly things that are going to cause my subconscious mind to recognize that I'm going to be successful. Most of the time, anything that you say with emotion, your subconscious mind does not understand the difference between reality and non-reality. Anything that is said with emotion behind it can be used to help you succeed. A lot of times in door-to-door sales, there's a lot of emotion involved. If you go to a door and someone gets mad at you, or maybe you missed out on a sale, you can get really down. But if you can use that emotion to get determined, you leave something maybe you didn't close a sale that you felt like you should have, and you leave the door, what do you say in between doors? It's important, because the greatest salesmen have mastered the ability to control what goes on in their head. And so the 6 inches between your ears is more important than any area that you go knock in, because if you can control that, then you can control the area, the motivations that you have, the momentum that you have, the energy that you bring to each door. And when you come, make sure that you follow those steps that we talked about earlier of having good posture, having the binder ready, the contract ready, and so forth. Now, what are the exact questions that we ask? Knowing that we understand that people are motivated by fear and desire, you want to find out their key concerns, their key benefits. You want to talk to the person and understand exactly what's going to cause them to get the system. Now, how do you get to that point of finding that out? There are just a few questions that I ask, and the principles behind these questions are, first, I want to get the yes principle. In other words, I want to get the customer in the habit of telling me yes, because if they say yes to smaller decisions or smaller questions, the ultimate yes of yes, I want to buy becomes easier for them to say. In addition, I want to find out, like I said earlier, I'm speaking to a person that can make a decision. So this is motivating some of the questions that I ask. In addition, I also want to find out their interest level. Because if their interest level is already high and you do not need to educate the customer anymore, they already know they want to buy, then stop your presentation and immediately just take out the paperwork and start filling that out. So you want to find the interest level. And then you also want to understand that with this, I like to follow, it's a spotlight rule, or just the fact that you have 2 ears, you have 1 mouth, you want to be listening twice as much as you talk. The best salesmen understand that their job is not to go up there and put on some sort of show, but to ask important questions that will get the person to respond to you in a way that you can understand them completely. And what are you trying to understand? Their key concerns, their key benefits. That's it. Their greatest, their fear. What are they going to fear about from getting your product? What is going to cause them to have a greater desire to get it? If you come in listening, understanding that, then these are principles that help you in any part of life, but in sales in particular. The person knows that you care enough about them. They'll pay attention if you are listening to their responses and base your approach on that. And so with the spotlight, what the principle here is, whenever you're speaking, the spotlight's on you. Whenever they're speaking, the spotlight is on them. Your goal is to have the spotlight on the customer almost all of the time. And so when I come to the door, these are the questions I ask in conjunction with these other principles. The yes principle, the decision maker, and their interest level. First, I ask them, how are you? How are you doing? When you ask this, the real trick to this is you have to mean it. How are you? And you're smiling, you're talking to the customer, they say, well, I'm doing good, how are you? If they ask that, I'm doing great, thanks for asking. Just like that. Now, if I say, they also want to know that you're listening. So if you say, how are you doing? And they go, what do you want? Well, I'm Seth, I'm here doing some satellite TV stuff. How are you doing? I always come back to the question that I asked if they don't give me an answer, because I sincerely want to know. And then once they understand that when you ask a question, you are listening for the answer to that question, they eventually start to give you the answers that you need to find out if their key concerns, key benefits. Okay, so how are you doing? Do you live here? Do you live here? The reason I ask this is because I want to find out if they're a decision maker, and it also gets another yes out of them. Most of the time you're speaking to the person that lives in the home, unless they're a relative visiting or something like that, fine. How are you? I'm doing good. How are you doing? Great. Thanks for asking. Do you live here? Yes, they do. Okay, good. When they say yes to that, I say, do you have cable? Do you have cable TV? Yes. Almost everybody answers yes to this. Great. Have you ever seen a satellite dish? They're going to answer yes to this. Have you ever considered getting one? Another question that I can put in here, it's kind of optional, but it goes between these two, is do you watch it? The reason I ask that is because obviously I want to find out how important TV is to them. Most of the time they just go, yeah, of course I watch TV. But another reason I ask that is because it gets another yes. And getting a person in the habit of telling you yes over and over and over again, you're eventually going to get that person to where they're like, well, I want to, it just becomes so much easier for them to give the ultimate yes when they've told you yes a number of times. And so, do you watch it? Have you ever seen a satellite dish? And normally what I do with that is when I have my binder, I'll just pull the binder up and point to the picture of the dish that's already on the binder. Have you ever seen a satellite dish before? Yes. Now, these questions are all important. the most important question after all of this is, have you ever considered or thought about getting a satellite dish? Have you ever considered getting one? Have you ever considered getting one? The reason I ask this is because what they're going to tell me is going to reveal to me the key concerns, key benefits. So when they say yes to this, I'm going to follow this up by saying, well, what kept you from getting it? What kept you? You said you've considered it. What kept you from getting it? And then they're going to list off their concerns. Concern 1, 2, and 3. And then what you do at this point is, because you've been listening to the customer, you're going to say, okay, so this, and this, that's what's kept you from getting it. Restate it. The reason you do that is because you've been listening, they understand that you're listening. When they say, yes, I understand, this person's listening to my concerns. He is concerned about me as a person. He's trying to understand my concerns. So you're going to list them back and say, is there anything else? So, have you considered it? Yes. What kept you from getting it? They're going to give you the concerns. At that point, you then say, is there anything else? You've been getting the customer to tell you yes the entire time here. When you ask the person, is there anything else? Hopefully they say no. But if they don't say no, they're going to say yes, there is something, and they're going to give you another concern, which isn't bad because you got them to give you another yes, and they give you another concern so you understand what their concerns are more. Or anything else? No. But this no right here, they've been waiting to tell you no the entire time. This no means what? Yes, I want to get it because these concerns are the only thing that are going to keep me from getting that. Okay. Then you say, now, you said you'd considered getting this before. You said you'd considered it. What caused you, oops, what caused you to look into it? You said you'd considered it. What caused you to look into it? In other words, what are the key benefits? And they're going to say something along the lines of, oh, my friend has it and he has a DVR. Or cable keeps going up. So you know that price is important to them. You're going to understand the things that cause a person to buy. So for example, if you were to look at this just like a scale. On one side you've got the key benefits. On one side you have the key concerns. If they start to give you the concerns, your job then is simply to either remove the concerns, take the fear of loss away so that they can see nothing but the benefits or the desire for gain. And we'll talk more about that in resolving concerns and how to actually do that. But ultimately, if you understand these principles, that when you go to the door, all you really care about is what's going to cause this person to get it, what's going to keep them from getting it. I want them to get into the habit of telling me yes as often as possible. I want to find out if they're a decision maker. I want to find out their interest level. Have you ever seen a dish? Have you ever considered getting it? Yeah, I want to get it right now. Okay, good. What's your name? And start filling out the paperwork. You don't need to find out any concerns. Yeah, I've thought about it. Well, what's kept you from getting it? Just haven't run down to the store to get it. Okay, well, my guys are going to be here today, tomorrow, and the next day. When are you normally home? And they're going to give you, and then they're going to give you time. You take down their name and information. You go right into that close. So this is basically contacting, just understanding why people make decisions, what keeps a person from making a decision, fear and desire for gain, fear of loss and desire for gain. What questions are you going to ask to lead them down a path that's going to get them to give you the eventual yes? Now, the yeses that they give here and hopefully the eventual yes right here, that's a perfect scenario. What happens when they don't answer in the affirmative to these questions? How do you deal with that? In last year's DVD, we gave this exact scenario. And then when people go out, they go, well, what do you say when a person says, hey, get lost? So I kind of want to go over that a little bit. And the other reactions that you're going to get to this other than yes. This one, most of the time the customer's going to say, I'm doing fine, how are you? Or I'm doing fine. Or they're not going to say anything. You could say, how are you? And they just go, they look at you and you just ask again because you're listening. You want to actually know, right? How are you doing? Then they're going to say, fine. Do you live here? Two things are going to happen. They're going to say yes, great, you're speaking to the decision maker. Or they're going to say no. What happens when they say no, they don't live here? You need to know basically where to go with this. So, no, I don't. Great. Where? Where do you live? They're going to give you an answer to that. If they live in a home, they're a homeowner or a decision maker at a different address, even a different state for that matter. We can say, okay, do you have cable? And bring it right back into the path that you're leading the customer down. Do you have cable? Yes, I have cable. Do you watch it? Of course I watch it. Okay? So, if they say yes to this, you're going to bring them to this. If they say no to do they live here, then you're going to ask them where they live, bring them back into cable. Do you have cable? Yes, I do. Okay, do you watch it? What if they say no? No, I don't have cable. Do you have a satellite dish? Ask them if they have satellite. If they say yes, they have a satellite dish, then you want to say, well, what do you have, Dish Network or DirecTV? If they have Dish, then you're going to say, do you know anyone else that would like to get it? If they have DirecTV, okay, great. Have you ever heard of Dish? Have you ever considered getting Dish Network before? And you're going to take them down here to the have you considered. Okay, so if they say no, do you have a satellite dish? If they say no to this, do you have anything? And they're going to say, well, I have an antenna. Okay, well, have you ever seen a satellite dish before? Or have you ever heard of Dish Network before? Something along those lines. Have you ever seen a dish before? Or have you ever heard of Dish Network? Both of those are typically going to get you the yes. But if they say, no, I haven't, and that's when you know you have to educate the customer starting at ground one, or ground zero. And then finally, have you ever considered getting a satellite dish? And if they say no to this, they're going to give you one of three responses. Yes, no, or not interested. It's one of these. If it's a yes, you're going to bring them right up into here. What kept you from getting it? What caused you to look into it to begin with? If they say, no, I haven't considered this, I might say, really, you've never even thought about it? At that point, they're going to say, well, I've thought about it. Okay, then you can bring them right back to this. Or they're going to say, no, and I'm not interested. And you're going to understand right away, maybe they have considered getting a dish, but they are not interested in talking about dish. What do you do then? What I do that works very effectively is I jump straight into, well, have you ever heard of TiVo or DVR? Have you ever heard of TiVo or DVR? So they're going to give you, no, I'm not interested. Well, have you ever heard of TiVo or DVR? It's where you can pause TV, skip commercials, rewind TV. About that point, they're going to say, yeah, I've heard about it. Now, if they say yes to this, which is most of the time, they're going to say yes, they've heard about it, especially when you give them those, when you kind of prod them along. If they start going, I don't know, DVR, TiVo, it's where you can pause TV, skip commercials, rewind TV. Yeah, I've heard about that. Where have you heard about it? I follow this up with where. The answer to that question is always one of three things: a friend, a relative, or they've heard about it on TV through a commercial or something like that. One of those three things. If it's a friend or a relative, oh, a friend at work has it, a coworker, my mom, brother, sister, father, whatever it is, my best friend has it. At this point I say, how do they like it? How do they like it? The answer to that is always positive. I've never met a person that says, they don't like it. They always say, wow, they love it. At that point, then you bring this back to this question again. have you ever considered getting it? So at first you're going to give them a satellite contact or path. Have you ever seen a satellite dish? Yeah, I've seen it. Have you ever considered? No, I'm not interested. Okay, well, have you ever heard of TiVo or DVR? Yeah, I've heard about that. Where did you hear about it? Oh, a friend at work has it. Does he like it? He loves it. Have you ever thought about getting it? At that point, they're going to say, well, how much is it? And then you're going to say, well, how many TVs do you have? And you're going to start going into the actual educating the customer, finding out how many TVs they have and which channels they watch and so forth. So, and if you get them to that point to where they ask you, have you ever, let me start over. If you get them to that point where they ask you, how much is it? Then you've done your job in contacting, in asking them good enough questions to lead them down a path that eventually leads to a close. One more principle about contacting. All of this right here, it's a path, it's like you're funneling a customer towards a close. Everything that you do, you're going to ask the exact same questions at every single door. It is not prudent to go around and change your door approach at every single door. You want to have the same approach, door after door after door, so that you can start to measure results. And you're going to start to get the exact same responses to the certain questions that you ask, like yes, no, not interested, a friend, a relative, a coworker, I've seen it on TV. I've asked the question so many times that I know exactly what the customer is going to say in return, and then when they give me that, whatever it is, the yes, the no, the not interested, the get lost, I know exactly what to say in response to that. If you show up at the door and you're changing your approach all the time, you're never going to be able to understand where to take that customer because you don't know what's coming. You don't know what the response is going to be. If your approach is always the same, door after door after door after door, you get to the point where you understand there's going to be a few variations, but the responses are almost going to be identical, so that you can come up with an appropriate response in turn that is going to get the customer towards the close, or at least towards listening to what the product that we offer or the benefits that it offers to their life. And so just remember that. Make sure that if you ever change your door approach, that you change it for a longer period than just 1 or 2 doors, because you can never gauge how good a door approach does on 1 or 2 or even 10 doors. But you can gauge it if you say, today I'm going to add a new question here. Instead of, have you ever seen a satellite dish? Maybe you're going to want to say, have you ever heard of Dish Network before? And just try it for a day. And then at the end of the day, you're going to say, you know, I like the results of that question better than this. And if that's the case, great, change your approach. But eventually, you're going to start to add questions here, take away questions here. But a great contactor, a great salesman who's great at contacting has learned the art of asking questions to get the spotlight back on the customer, so that when they are talking to you, you're understanding, you're listening to what their concerns are, to what their key benefits, key concerns are, so you understand how to tailor the education part, the actual telling them about the product to their needs. And you're going to use the exact same door approach door after door, so that you can also get good at responding to the exact same concerns, the exact same responses that everybody gives you. So that's basically contacting. We'll talk about qualifying and educating the customer later.